Good morning to friends from Western Hemisphere. Hi, John, including yourself. And good evening to all the friends and guests from the Eastern Hemisphere, in Asia, in China. Hello, welcome back again, everybody, and the dear old friends and new friends. This is our fifth webinar presented by GASonline. This is Frank Xu, founder and CEO of China IG Member Alliance. Following our fourth webinar in May, when GASonline invited Mr. Saki Tiko, president of EGMA, to attend and share his presentation on the market status and the action taken by EGMA from India in the serious situation of COVID-19. And this is a very fruitful dialogue. So by the first week of June up to now, we have noticed the COVID-19 has been under control in most European countries and Asia, but not in North and South American countries. Some countries have witnessed the worsening development by today. So in such uncertain and evolving circumstances, we are expecting to have a good and precise analysis of the situation from an experience and a broader perspective, and help you get on hand a guiding direction for our industry ahead, and see what we have gone through and what will happen in this unpredictable situation globally. Tonight, it is my great honor of inviting our UK partner of a long time friendship since 1999. So Mr. John Rackard accepted my invitation. He's the publisher, CEO of GasWorld. So we will listen what John will share the updates of the global trend of dynamic changes of our industry after the past 5 months since COVID-19 happened. Let's give a warm saying hello to John from all our offline delegates. Thank you, John. So next, please allow me introduce you our good friend, John Rackard. John is the founder and CEO of GasWorld, a global media and events company. He's also managing director of a Spiritus company, an international consultancy specializing in the industrial gases sector. He has been associated with the industrial gases businesses for almost 40 years, formerly working with Air Products in both the UK and South Africa, before joining Taylor Watson, a major gas equipment manufacturer. Following his direct involvement in the gases business, John joined Chem Systems, a leading chemical consultancy firm based in London, for 8 years. So before starting up what became Spiritus in 1995, he has made Spiritus a leading niche consultancy focused on industrial gases businesses, and has been involved in a number of major M&A deals around the world. John is a regular speaker and commentator to the financial institutes in Europe and in the US, and presents papers at both industrial and investor conferences across the world. In 2003, he founded GasWorld.com Limited and has remained CEO of this business and steered the company to become the leading and only true global news information service. GasWorld now offers news, information, conferences, and business intelligence through the various media channels. Tonight, Mr. John Rackard has prepared for us a big pack of his presentation with rich content and with his view of the global industrial gases. Now it is your time. John, please share with us.
Frank, for that kind introduction. As you heard, my name is John Rackay, and I'm going to talk to you about today the global industrial gases business and the impact of COVID-19 on our industry. So for the agenda today, I'm going to talk about the status of the global gases business today, the restructuring of the industry that's happened over the past 3 years, and the impact of COVID-19 that is currently affecting many parts of the world and is likely to have an impact over the next 18 months. And then just briefly summarize what I think will happen over the next couple of years. So the global gases business reached $76.5 billion in 2019. Now, to explain that excludes equipment sales, hard goods and consumables related to welding, wholesales, and non-specific gas businesses like LPG and home care services that are not oxygen related. The impact of the strong US dollar suppressed market growth by 5% last year. The underlying growth of volumes and pricing was reasonably good, but in the second half of last year had a negative impact on the overall performance of the business, as well as the impact of the US dollar. Significant restructuring has taken place, as I mentioned, in the past 3 years. Air Liquide acquired Airgas in 2016. Linde and Praxair merged, which was finally agreed in October 2018. Linde of Gas Americas was sold off to Mesa and CVC Consortium in March this year, and Praxair Europe was mainly sold to Toyo Nippon Sanso, now called Nippon Gases in Europe, in October last year. The industrial gases in EBIT is at an all-time high, currently running at around 18% EBIT margin for the tier 1 players. And the global economy and industrial gas business has been impacted clearly by the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'll speak about a bit later on. So let's turn attention to the graph you'll see next to me, which is about the comparison of the gas growth, industrial production and GDP, and this is all on the global level, since 1980 to 2019. And you can see that the gas industry has in the main performed better than both GDP and IPI. Obviously, back in 2009, everything came to a crunch, and the industrial gases business was not immune in that year to the decline in the market. Our industry globally experienced a 10% reduction in the business, but thankfully our industry is very robust, and that we regained our position to about 2008 by 2012. Along the way, though, up to 2019, we've really experienced relatively lower growth than we have seen in the previous 2-3 decades. And in fact, in 2016, there was another mini decline, mainly related to the strength of the US dollar, which has an impact on as this is all presented in dollars, it had an impact on the gases business at that time. The actual global revenue trends, as you can see that we've mapped out, we follow the tier 1 companies, and we take what their total business was doing, gas business that is, and then what the underlying is. So we strip out the currency impact, we strip out mergers and acquisitions, and also the natural gas pass-through impact. So you can see that the underlying performance of our industry was performing a lot better than what was totally recorded by the gas companies. And then the next chart we have the underlying revenue drivers split between volume and price. And you can see the impact in the last few quarters of volume dropping away in the last half of 2019. Pricing actually stood up relatively well. So structurally, I would like to show you a chart here which shows the global gases business split by player, major player, in 2017, and how the industry looked at that time. Air Liquide was clearly the number one player, Linde the number two, Praxair the number three, and then you had Air Products and Teunip and Sanso and Messer as some of the other players. And you can see that of those major tier one players, they accounted for just under 70% of the global gases business. Now take a look at what happened in 2019. And this follows the merger of Linde and Praxair, and they have become the clear number one player, Air Liquide number two. But what has happened is that as part of the mandated divestments required by our industry and authorities, the FTC and the European Commission, and in one or two other countries, they had to divest large chunks of business in order for this transaction to be completed. And so the beneficiaries of that have been Teunip and Sanso, as I mentioned, in Europe, Messer in the US, and also Air Water from Japan has picked up some of the business in India. So what's the status of the Praxair-Linde merger, now called Linde PLC? The North American package mostly went to MG Industries, the joint venture between Messer and CVC, the private equity group. Praxair absorbed the home care business, but then very recently sold the life gas business to a local distributor called Nexair. Matheson, the subsidiary of Teunip and Sanso, acquired some of the Hyco business, and the Laporte Hyco units were actually acquired by some of the customers that Linde had served. And then Iwatani recently picked up some merchant hydrogen business from MG Industries that they felt was not part of their ongoing portfolio. In South America, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia were all restructured, and MG Industries picked up those businesses from both Linde and Praxair. The European package, most of the European package for Praxair was sold to Teunip and Sanso. And one other event happened, or one other restructuring happened, was that the tier two Italian company SIAD group that was part owned by Praxair was acquired, the Praxair share was acquired back, and and became a completely independent company. And in Asia and the Far East, as I mentioned, first of all, Linde and Praxair sold some businesses in India, and that went to Air Water. Linde Gas Korea sold some of the business to a private equity group called IMM. And then Praxair and Linde have actually sold a little bit, actually it's mainly Linde, sold part of their southern China business to Chinese companies. In terms of industry activity, what else has been happening? Well, obviously Linde Group, the new Linde PLC, is in the process of integrating both companies. That's going well, and that's underway. They will continue to their cost reduction program, and they will likely to divest some non-core businesses over the coming year or 2 years. Air Liquide is still integrating the air gas business, but much of that has been achieved. They're also integrating the recent acquisition of Tech Air, a sort of medium-sized distributor that Airgas acquired. via Air Liquide last year. And they are focusing on investment, and Air Liquide is focusing on investment in the Middle East and the Asia Pacific region. One of the major changes going on as well is with Air Products, where they acquired a CO2 business in Europe, and which was ACP, and they're integrating that. But they have made quite a large strategic shift to large gasification projects and chemical expansion in the Middle East, China, and the Texas Gulf Coast region. And we've also seen recently that they've acquired some HYCO units from refineries. So they're continually investigating possible acquisition targets in North America, South America, Middle East, and the Asia Pacific region. Toyo Nippon Sanso, that's currently integrating the North American HYCO business with Matheson. We understand that they will be obviously working and understanding the European business that they've acquired and essentially protecting what was a very profitable business. And then they intend to develop their Asian business outside of Japan. But let's not forget some of the other companies like Mesa Group. They are rationalizing and understanding the new operating structure with their JV partner CVC, and they will continue to invest in China and the Asia Pacific region. Airwater has undertaken an expansion within the Asia region for starters, and secondly, they have acquired equipment companies both in Europe and the US as they entered those markets via an equipment strategy rather than a gas strategy. Yingde and Baosteel Gas, both part of the PAG investment group. Yingde remains the #1 supply scheme player in China, but they recently announced that they were interested in the Indian market and have made a strategic entry into that market. So their first venture outside of China. And no doubt the new CEO of Yingde, Stephen Feng, will be also looking at trying to consolidate Baosteel Gas with the Yingde operations. And then finally, Iwatani, they continue to look at opportunities in Southeast Asia, opportunities in hydrogen and helium, and they have recently acquired some business, special gases business in the US, and some hydrogen business. So what about 2020 and beyond? The major events impacting on the global industrial gases business, well, there are three, basically, as far as I can see. COVID-19 pandemic, the global economy has been impacted adversely, and the IMF is predicting a decline of 3% in the global GDP in 2020. Europe, the US, and South America are expected to be hardest hit. Mixed impact across the manufacturing, petrochemicals, electronics, and metal sector. However, food and medical sectors have been still remain positive, and the level impact and rate of recovery has economists rushing to find the answers. I can't give you the answers there, really. I can give you a view of what we think will happen. But certainly no one really knows what the impact of the pandemic is going to have over the next 18 months at this stage. But we mustn't forget that it's not just the pandemic. The pandemic has caused us to not use transport fuels. We're not flying, we're not driving our cars, or we're reducing the amount of time we're using our cars and so on. So not surprisingly, the refining industry and the sale of oil has collapsed in terms of pricing and volume. And so the low oil prices and other energy sectors is going to also have a dampening effect on the industrial gases business, because obviously we require power, and if power prices are going down, well, so will the sales price, particularly in on-sites, will be going down as well in terms of revenues generated from that, particularly in the hydrogen sector if natural gas pricing is down. So we have to take into account the impact of lower energy costs. And also, not surprisingly, there are many projects that were slated for the Middle East, which, of course, being oil economy dependent, will be impacted by the much lower oil prices that they had not envisaged. And one other item which I bring to your attention is also the helium business. Up until, I would say, February, March time, helium was in great short supply. I'm sure many of people listening to this are aware of the high helium prices and the low availability of product from particularly spot sources. The COVID-19 pandemic has suppressed demand recently, and this has caused a lightening or a loosening of the supply conditions that were very tight. I wouldn't say that there's plenty of helium around, but what I would say is that the tight conditions have gone away over the past few months. What we will see is new additions to capacity coming on stream in 2021 and 2022 that will result in more helium being available and potentially in lower pricing of product in the marketplace. Now, will that be enough to regain the volumes that we've seen lost over the past decade? The helium shortage 2.0 in 2011, 2012 caused a major rethink of end users using helium as a product, particularly in the MRI manufacturing sector. And as a result of that, technology shift and changes in welding, in MRI manufacturing, and even in leak detection has resulted in a change in the demand dynamics of helium. Now, with more availability and lower pricing, we don't expect some of that volume has been lost forever, right? So we've got to see what's going to take the place of those applications for the helium business. So in summary, I would like to present this chart, which shows what happened from 2009, the last recession, what we expect to see in 2020 overall, and then what we see panning out to 2025. The industrial gas business could drop to between 7 and 12% in 2020. If the IMF predicting 3% decline in GDP, that could point to a 7 to 10% decline in industrial production index. Now, if you follow what happened in 2009, the industrial gases business was impacted even higher than the industrial production index. But we don't think the situation is as bad as 2009 in all the sectors. So what we intend to do is we think that it'd be down by about 7 or 8%. But if the worst case scenario happens, our industry could be down by 12%. But you'll see from the chart that the recovery would be expected. It's almost a V-shaped recovery, which is usual for our industry, that once things come about and recover, the end user industries, that our industry recovers very quickly. Obviously, there's mixed activity right at this moment. I'm hearing that in China, the steel industry is very buoyant. There's actually a lack of oxygen available for the merchant market, so pricing has gone up because more oxygen is needed in the steel sector. So, converse to that with the decline in Europe and in the States, it'll be interesting to see what really pans out. But we really forecast a growth globally for the industrial gases business of between 4.5% and 5.5% a year over the next 5 years once we enter the recovery. obviously energy costs and pass-through will also determine how quickly our industry recovers. So thank you for listening. I turn it back over to Frank for any questions that you may have. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you, John. This is a really very precise your presentation and analysis to the industry itself, and from the past looking optimistic. And now the COVID-19 crisis really caused a lot of problems. But however, from your summary, and I think we will feel both we must have to face this current situation to be hardworking enough and patient. And on the other side, as you mentioned, that in terms of the overall global economy, the recovery, hoping to see the recovery from the next year, or from your summary, is your good viewpoint. So, but however, then I should like to thank you again for this rich content of your information. I hope and all our delegates here today, they must have some good idea what we are going to do next. So this is the Q&A time. So we're waiting for questions from delegates. So let me, John, I have a first question to you. According to WHO, the World Health Organization, the updated figure of COVID-19 worldwide has hit a top of 10 million cases identified, with roughly 1 million new cases of COVID-19 being reported around the world every week. This is a really horrible figure. And WHO has warned hospitals that they are facing a shortage of oxygen concentrators. This is some news I read. So the global impact really from this COVID-19 are enormously striking on the global economies and IG markets. So what we would like, myself and all our offline delegates would like to hear, and from your side, any suggestion to our industry players, the priority of business, this restructuring, such as the consumption, as you mentioned, the consumption reduction of oil and energy, LNG, such and such. So please, John.
Well, thank you, Frank. Yes, I haven't had any dealings with the WHO, but I have been in conversations with the World Bank. And the World Bank have over 100 projects around the world at the moment. And those 100 project teams, one of the items that they're trying to address is the oxygen supply situation in various countries, mainly emerging countries, or countries that are not blessed with such absolute facilities to supply the right oxygen, the right quality, and sufficient oxygen as related to the pandemic. So, however, there's been a bit of confusion out there because the lack of understanding about what oxygen is and how the hospitals need to get the oxygen. Traditionally, the oxygen is in many developing countries is supplied in cylinder form. That's the tradition, and many clinics and hospitals will have cylinders of oxygen around at the time. Clearly, the pandemic is currently known as a respiratory virus, and the treatment is to put as many of the patients in the hospital on either ventilators or oxygen. So obviously, a typical hospital is normally geared up to have 25% of its patients on oxygen in some format or other. That's either through cylinders, or the more advanced hospitals, they will have liquid oxygen supply, which would be vaporized and piped through the hospital itself. So, and the problem is that many hospitals are overrun. They no longer have a demand of 25% of the patients, but at least 50% of the patients related to COVID virus. So therefore, they need to, that their demand is significantly higher. So the solutions to that, obviously, one of the problems is actually getting the cylinders turned around by the local suppliers, but also in many cases, the oxygen supplied has to be medical grade or medical purity. And whether that's supplied in shiny looking cylinders with clean valves or whatever, the task at the moment is to get sufficient oxygen to the patient. And one of the solutions that some companies have been looking at is talking to the local authorities in order to be able to supply industrial grade oxygen, which is still pretty pure product, if not the same purity, but obviously the cylinders will be of slightly poorer quality because they're being used for welding and cutting purposes. So that is one solution. The other solutions are a little bit long-termist or medium-term, in that some hospitals would like to have their own pressure swing absorption unit, oxygen generator outside the hospital. Well, they take time to deliver to start off with, which doesn't help matters much. And secondly, the hospitals, they will either need to use that oxygen, link it up to the pipeline if they're a slightly more advanced hospital, or to be able to fill oxygen cylinders with medical grade oxygen or oxygen to supply to the hospitals. So that's an alternative, but that's a slightly longer term solution and doesn't help the current crisis that's going on. What you've read in the press is that they're trying to get as many oxygen concentrators out there. And these oxygen concentrators are actually the ones that are used for home care therapy. So if you've been to the hospital and they've released you, but you still need oxygen therapy, or you have a respiratory issue, normally you're either sent home in the developed areas or developed regions or countries. You're sent home and they either supply you with a cylinder of oxygen at home, or they supply you with an oxygen concentrator, which basically is a small air separation plant, but sits by the side of your chair. That's not so prevalent in many countries, like in Asia and Africa, for instance, because those oxygen concentrators, need power to work, to start off with. They also need to be maintained. And at the moment, what they're trying to do is feed those oxygen concentrators into the hospitals rather than work at home. But it's again a case of the oxygen concentrator manufacturers being able to supply enough of these oxygen concentrators to various hospitals. And at the end of the day, there's one overriding factor which shouldn't be the case, because the patient care is the most important thing. But this is where the World Bank is trying to help, is to provide funding, because someone has to pay for the oxygen concentrators or the oxygen gas at the time. And many governments are not set up for this increased demand in dealing with oxygen. So the World Bank is trying to help out with providing some sort of funding route or mechanism to governments to fund the extra oxygen, or to invest in oxygen concentrators or more cylinders, or even plants that are able to provide the sufficient oxygen. So there's a lot of activity going on out there, but it's not fast enough, regrettably. So lives are being lost because we're not getting oxygen to the patient.
Thank you. I agree, John, that this is really a pressing situation now for all the countries, especially the countries under well developed, with less support from either the different level of governmental authorities. So there's something is very interesting, as you said in your answer. India, EGMA, in the last webinar, EGMA has suggested the Indian government, to take the alternative of using the industrial oxygen to add up to the shortage of hospital oxygen, medical oxygen. This is you know this, and you acknowledge this is a right. How can I say, the immediate alternative solution, right?
It's a solution. It's a temporary solution. It should be a temporary solution because the quality of oxygen supplied to hospitals should be of the medical grade and certified. So it's not just the quality of the oxygen, it's the quality of the cylinders, the valves, the regulators, so that they are fit for purpose for a medical environment. That is the key. However, if there is insufficient equipment, as in medical certified cylinders or valves or regulators, then basically there is little option but to supply cylinders that are normally for industrial use, for cutting purposes with acetylene and so on. They're going to be dirty looking, right? But the oxygen inside it, in the main, generally would be fit for purpose, right? And I, for one, if I was faced with no oxygen or an industrial cylinder of oxygen sat next to my bed, I'd be taking the industrial grade oxygen because that's vital, right? Okay. Now it's a temporary fix and it should not be the norm, right? But it's a temporary fix to get over the apparent shortage of oxygen.
Thanks. From your my question to you is, in your answer that you mentioned, World Bank has been conducting some support and with some projects, right? Of 100 projects. Do you have any specific information for this? And maybe our industrial equipment suppliers, they will be very interested in to know how to approach these kind of projects.
Yeah. Well, I'm smiling, and I shouldn't be, because it's obviously a very serious situation, right? But the reason I'm smiling is that I have tried because there are companies that approach me how they could be talking to the World Bank. And the answer is, whilst the World Bank is headquartered in New York, I've actually spoken to the World Bank there, and they do not manage things centrally. So there isn't one person to go to in New York or Washington, right, where you can talk to them about how, whether it's your company or your government or IGMA or whatever, can help with the World Bank and situation and their projects, right? And that's a key problem. So the only suggestion I have is that companies approach the World Bank organization in each country separately, making the offer of equipment and so on, and striking up that dialogue. That's far from perfect, but that's the only way, and the only way that I've been told you can really stand any chance of getting hold of anybody in the World Bank related to being able to supply and resolve the situation, because there's no one centrally coordinating it in Washington.
Yeah, thank you for that. And now questions from the delegates, John. First one is from India, a gentleman called Karthik Panjab Carbonic. His question say, any specific projection for CO2 industry in particular? Any specific projection for CO2 industry in particular? That's his simple question.
Okay. Well, first of all, CO2 is an interesting topic, because if you've been following anybody who's been following the news headlines, particularly on the GasWorld website and in other areas as well, that there are countries and regions where there is a current CO2 shortage. We experienced that 2 years ago in Europe. We experience at this time of year, in May, June, July, August, the summer months, a tightening in supply, because that's the peak time that CO2 is in demand, and that's mainly from food and beverage industry. Now, part of that has been compensated because of the lack of flights. A lot of CO2 is used in slices for airline catering, to keep the food cool on multiple flights. Well, the number of, we're down 90% in the number of flights that are taking place. So the amount of dry ice being consumed has meant that there's a slightly relieving of some of the pressure for CO2. But to answer your question about projections of CO2, CO2 is mainly driven by the consumer in food and beverage, and it doesn't matter whether it's an emerging region or it's a developed region. It's governed by the growth in the consumer sector and in the food processing sector. So I would be predicting that the use of CO2 would follow normal trends, and obviously in Europe and in the United States or North America, that growth would be closer to 3-4% a year. It's been boosted slightly from some of the applications that have needed more CO2 in recent years. I won't cover that today. But in Europe, the demand is also relatively normal at about 3-4% a year, whereas other developing regions, the consumer and the use of CO2 in carbonated drinks, in food processing and so on, is leaning towards more towards the 6-7%, 5-6-7% a year, depending on the state of the country and so on. So I would guess, with a proper judgment there, that you're talking about, depending on the region, it's very, very difficult. In India, I would imagine that you're at the top end of the growth that I've been talking about.
Thank you, John. Yes, I hope, Kathy, you're happy with the answer from John. So the next question is from TL Gas. The question is, big gas players such as like Air Liquide, is like Air Liquide, Linde, AP have H2 fueling station. What is your suggestion to Chinese gas company?
Well, okay, this is an interesting one, because you're really talking about the use of hydrogen as an energy vector, in this case in mobilization. So whether it's cars, bikes, motorcycles, trucks, vans, there is this drive towards cleaner energy from that perspective. So and in a sense, that is a slightly different, it's what I call in the grey zone of what constitutes industrial gas, because the industrial gas industry has grown up on its applications and so on. They understand the hydrogen molecule very, very well. So not surprisingly, companies like Air Liquide, Linde and Air Products have explored over the last 15 years, this isn't anything new, the last 15 years, a way of developing the hydrogen economy. However, we get down to a couple of things. One is it's the will of the government, right, to change the transport infrastructure away from hydrocarbon fuels to hydrogen. So there has to be support from the local governments on that front. And secondly, it's how do you, at the moment, the largest source of hydrogen comes from hydrocarbons. So whether it's natural gas and gasifying natural gas and splitting it into hydrogen and CO and naturally CO2. So for all the time that you produce hydrogen, if it's from hydrocarbon sources, whilst it might be natural gas rather than from oil or diesel or any other application, right, you're also producing CO2. And that's exactly what you're trying to do is trying to lower the CO2. So they are talking about no longer trying to produce black or brown hydrogen, which is all associated with hydrocarbons, but they're either trying to produce blue hydrogen, which means that you're sequestering the CO2 and putting it back down into the ground, or you're actually producing green hydrogen, which is from photovoltaics or wind farms generating hydrogen from electrolysis. All that needs to be developed, but it needs a community to come together. And in a sense, we're seeing that with the Hydrogen Council, which is a global entity where you've got gas companies, oil and chemical companies, or oil and gas companies, the energy suppliers, as well as the automotive industry and the equipment suppliers, all coming together to work out how this is best delivered, and then to lobby governments in order to support the infrastructure that's needed. And at the end of the day, you need the hydrogen available, right, in order to be able to fill cars before the car manufacturers really start to roll out the hydrogen-based cars that will be there, either combustion or fuel cell related cars. So I hope I've answered the question on that.
Yes, I can understand the question from Wendy. She would like to know the suggestion to Chinese gas company. Actually, in China, over the past, this is a hot topic now for hydrogen, for mobility. And now central government under, there is a Ministry of Science and Technology has been driving this as the most cleanest energy for the coming years. Now, I don't know whether there is a trend to replace the EV, the electronic vehicle, in the coming years or not, because there some major group of experts say, okay, hydrogen is must be the alternative for electrical EV vehicles in the coming years. So in China, we have ministry support. We have some kind of similar, as you say, the council or hydrogen council. But this is something will not happen overnight or in 1 or 2 years. As you said, that our leading gas players, they have put a lot of efforts over the past 15 years or even more. So I agree that for Chinese gas manufacturers or who are interested in this must do something to reach out with the international or kind of a hydrogen council or association to working together to convince or bring in the know-how, bring in the expertise to in front of the Chinese experts or government officials. So might be a good suggestion. I said, John, that you might bring some kind of conference to China. So this is what we need. Yeah. So the next question is also from Wendy. She said, she asked, it is heard that there is a big helium source in Siberia, in Russia. Yeah, this is well known. Do you have any information when this new source will be on stream? And can you share with us the possible impact to helium market after it is on stream? You have mentioned in your PPT. Please, John.
Yeah. Yes. Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct. It is well known that Russia are developing huge natural gas fields in Siberia, Western Siberia, Eastern Siberia. Siberia is a massive area, and so there's a lot of gas that can be extracted there. And what they're doing is that they're piping it, and they're going to be recovering helium in the contained natural gas. And yes, you're absolutely right that the plans there are for some significant helium production, over the next 15, 20 years. The timing, as far as I'm aware, is that Gazprom, that is developing these resources, are planning to start up their first helium plant towards the second half of 2021. And then they've got a second plant that they're due to come on stream in 2022. And in all, they'll have about 3 or 4 streams, hopefully operating by 2024, 2025. So overall, they're going to have something like 2.5 to 3 billion cubic feet of new capacity coming on stream, with the worldwide demand being at around 6 billion. So they will be a supplier with about a third of the capacity to the marketplace. Obviously, another large resource for helium is Qatar and the Middle East, and there'll be new capacity coming on stream as well, hopefully later towards the end of this year and next year, probably the second half of next year. There'll be additional capacity coming on stream in Qatar. So what everybody's noticed is obviously in the build-up in 2018, 2019, as I've already mentioned, and going into 2020, there was a tight supply situation. Customers were on quotas, pricing was high. Now, COVID-19 and the worldwide slowdown has helped relieve that oversupply situation, over demand and the tight supply situation. So it's returning down to a little bit more of a balanced situation. We would see that through until one of two things happens. When industry starts building up again, demand will start to take off again, but not necessarily take off. And obviously we will get new production capacity coming on stream next year, mainly next year. And what you'll see is a trend towards a much better balanced situation, even a potential oversupply situation as we move into 2023, 2024. That impact would be more product available, and slightly softer pricing that you've experienced from that perspective. So that's what I would be expecting to see. The timing is a little bit wavery, but I would say that we're really starting to see a change in supply dynamics from about the second half of 2021.
Thank you, John. It's really Good news, huh? I hope that our delegate Wendy, she will be also happy about this news, right? So then the last question from offline delegate, Mike, his question to you, John, is in your forecast after 2020, why is GDP and industrial gas increase positively compared? Will there be an outbreak development like after the 2008 financial crisis? Oh, this is a good question. Shall I repeat?
Yeah, it is. It is a good question, and I'm glad to answer it. As you saw from my presentation, we're fortunate in the industrial gases business that we're a very robust industry. One of the reasons is that we supply gases, as I've mentioned already, to many industries. So the financial crisis in 2009, we had a V-shaped recovery, right? And you've seen that, you saw that in the chart. And by, I think it was about 2010, 2011, we had reached the same value and level of gas business as of 2008, before the financial crisis. Now, the pandemic has caused two has a double impact, I would say, and it's very difficult. You know, the economists at the moment have no way of really predicting how this is going to turn out. For one, so I'm not an economist. I'm going on gut feel of how our industry normally responds. But the pandemic, we're already seeing the potential of a second spike in some countries. So at the moment, we've got a large proportion of the world fighting the first spike in the COVID and the impact on the COVID industry. Europe, we see countries like China, South Korea, Japan, where they're recovering from the first bout and recovering relatively well. Europe is recovering. Now we have to see what impact the industry is going to have. The US appeared to be recovering, but in a sense, the lack of control that's going on out there, some of the states are starting to shut down again. So you could question, on that, where the control is of beating the current pandemic. So there is a chance that we won't necessarily get a V-shaped recovery. And the second impact of COVID is that we're not traveling so far. We're not flying much. Let's put it this way. As I said, only about 10% of air flights of normal are taking place at the moment. And we're not driving so much. We're not driving distances. We're not using buses. And so the demand for oil, and you saw at one point in the States that oil was a negative value. So this is going to have a second impact on our industry in that energy prices will come down, right? Oil prices are down. It may have an impact on natural gas pricing as well because we're not using it. So there is a pan-worldwide impact of COVID on just energy prices. Well, if that's the case, it will slow the recovery because as you know, our industry is very energy intensive. 50-60% of a ton of oxygen is the cost of power, right? Okay. Hydrogen, a lot of the hydrogen is produced by natural gas. Natural gas prices, if they're low, they are automatically passed through to the customer, and when they go up, they get passed through to the customer, and when they go down, they get passed through to the customer. So I'm expecting more of a I don't know what best way to describe it, a Nike symbol or a hockey stick or a tick mark type recovery rather than a V-shaped recovery. And so it's very difficult to predict how fast that recovery is. And if we have a second spike and we have to start locking down, or if a second phase of this pandemic happens in the wintertime, it's going to slow the recovery for sure.
Thank you, John. Yes. Thank you for your such a detailed analysis and your personal view about the overall economy and also, of course, our industry. So before we finish, then I have one final question. It's a little bit bigger for you to but I think everybody now, most people now would like to know something really big from your valuable experience over the past 40 years. Now, this is unpredictable. It is unprecedented crisis for all the countries on the earth. This is really, as you say, hard to predict anything, but I do hope that you can predict something for us. What can you predict will be the next biggest change or restructuring of IG industry in the wake of COVID-19?
Wow, that's
Too big.
That is a big question. Okay, so well, let's put it this way. I think the change, if there is to be a change, it's certainly not at the top end of restructuring the industry any further. In that, we've just been through the last 3 years the merger of Praxair and Linde's business together, and in order to make that happen, both companies had to divest of a significant amount of business, and we saw that a little bit in China, some in South Korea, some in India, right, and then some big chunks in Europe and in the United States, with a little bit in South America. We don't think that there's going to be any significant restructuring at the top level now. It's happened. You saw from my pie chart that 4 companies now, or 4 or 5 companies, dominate the worldwide market of up to 70% of the market. So it's very consolidated, and I don't see any restructuring from that. I think what you will be seeing is a change in the emphasis of where these companies are starting to look for growth. We've already mentioned the hydrogen economy as one. Our gas industry understands the hydrogen molecule, as I mentioned before, and they also understand other gases, particularly CO2. So they are going to be probably involved more in the environmental aspects of how we can reduce CO2, as well as how we can supply a grid with hydrogen that is effective and efficient, and so on. So I think their focus will be on slightly different aspects of the industrial gases business. That's the gas companies. So I think they will be embracing more environmental applications as we go forward. But many of your listeners or delegates to this webinar are from probably manufacturers of equipment. And there's going to be, I think, a need, and it might be slightly controversial, but I would say that there is a need for the equipment manufacturers to start consolidating themselves. Why? Well, very simply, there are too many cryogenic tank manufacturers, there are too many cylinder manufacturers, there are too many valve manufacturers around the world manufacturing equipment. Some are good standard, high standard, specialized products, and others are substandard. And what I would say is that there are plenty of manufacturers out there, but I would say that there's probably too many involved in the supply of equipment in this sector. So I would look to the equipment manufacturers to start consolidating, or if not, carry on manufacturing, but look at different industries to supply different products in order to branch out from just the industrial gases sector. And that's one thing that I would see in the next 5 years. It's not as a result of COVID, but the slowdown in industry. Everybody's chasing a customer that wants to buy a cryogenic tank. The customer's happy, of course, because everybody's falling over to supply them. Let's put it this way. But at the end of the day, it's all about, our industry is about safety, and let's not forget that. We have various safety organizations around the world, and what we have to do is maintain quality and safety standards within our industry. It only takes one cylinder to go bang, and we've seen some of those in recent weeks and months, where a cylinder has unfortunately exploded, and it only takes one for our worldwide industry to be impacted by that. So it's very important that we improve the safety standards, and equipment manufacturers will only do that when they start focusing on the quality of the products and not the number of units that they're trying to get in terms of market share. So a bit controversial to end on, right? Or if it is a last question, but I thought I would really be open about that.
Thank you, John. This is really brilliant and valuable suggestion to our industry. Now, we've seen the M&A for the big gas manufacturers, and now as you recommend, it is time for the equipment suppliers, whatever sort, and to come to a consideration of consolidation. Yes, I absolutely come to the consensus with you, and I might pass this valuable suggestion to our Chinese equipment suppliers. Good. Thank you so much, John, for your time and efforts preparing such a big pack, Maggie pack for our delegates today. Thank you so much, and we would like to meet you again, maybe in Hangzhou or in September if you can fly. Okay, you do be our the VIP guest and to join us. Okay, thank you all our delegates putting questions to John, and we will also like to continue prepare some more good contents for all of us. Have a good day. Good night.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.